I believed silence could protect us, the quiet peace of our marriage, the unspoken understanding, the everyday routine that kept us safe. But silence doesn't heal, it hides. And behind the calm surface of my seemingly perfect life, my husband was living a secret I never imagined. When the truth finally came out, it didn't just break my heart, it shattered everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. This is the story of how silence became my prison, and how I had to find my voice to break free. Part 1: The Quiet Before the Storm. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a metronome marking the quiet rhythm of my life. Every morning started the same, the soft hum of the coffee machine, the smell of toast warming the kitchen, and the distant sound of Greg's footsteps as he prepared for work. I watched him through the kitchen doorway, his back to me as he grabbed his briefcase, kissed my cheek, and said, "Have a good day, love." We had built a life on routines, predictable, comfortable, and, I thought, unbreakable. Our marriage was the kind that neighbors admired without knowing the cracks beneath the surface. Greg was a man of few words but many actions. He never forgot an anniversary, brought me flowers on random Tuesdays, and always made sure the house was in order. I told myself that love didn't need to be loud. We had something solid, something quiet and steady. But as the months went by, the silence grew heavier. Greg was coming home later, more distracted, sometimes retreating into his phone or laptop with attention I couldn't reach. I asked, but he shrugged it off with tired smiles and vague explanations about work deadlines. I wanted to believe him. I buried my doubts beneath a mask of understanding. After all, life wasn't easy. We were trying to conceive, balancing careers, and managing the house. Stress could explain anything, right? But there were moments when the silence screamed louder than any words ever could. One night, I found my phone buzzing with a message from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it, dread curling in my stomach. The text was simple, but enough to make my heart stop. "Can we meet? We need to talk." No name, no clue. I stared at the screen, confused and scared. That night, Greg came home later than usual. I waited, my hands trembling as I confronted him. He looked at me with tired eyes, the kind that didn't meet mine like before. "I found a message," I said quietly. Greg sighed, the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths pressing down on him. Then he did something I never expected. He told me about Claire, his assistant, about the late-night meetings that blurred the lines between work and something else, about the feelings he didn't know how to handle. I remember sitting there, stunned, as if my entire world was slipping through my fingers in slow motion. The man I loved had built a secret life in the shadows of our home, in the silence I thought was peace. The following days were a haze of tears, sleepless nights, and endless questions. How long? Why? Could we survive this? But what hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the silence that had allowed it to grow, unnoticed and unchecked. The quiet moments I mistook for trust had been the spaces where deceit took root. I realized that silence was not a shelter, it was a prison. And if I wanted to be free, I had to break it, no matter the cost. Part 2: Cracks Beneath the Surface. The house felt unbearably quiet after that night, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was a heavy silence, full of unspoken words and shattered dreams. I moved through each day like a ghost, trying to make sense of the betrayal, trying to hold on to the fragments of the life I thought I had. Greg was distant now, not just physically, but emotionally unreachable. He tiptoed around me like I was glass, avoiding the topics I begged him to face. Every time I tried to ask questions, he'd shut down or deflect. The man who once held my hand through every challenge now seemed like a stranger, one I was terrified to lose but couldn't recognize anymore. I started replaying everything in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. The late dinners, the sudden calls he took outside the house, the little lies that suddenly felt like a flood. How had I been so blind? Then there was Claire. The name alone felt like poison on my tongue. I imagined her perfectly, the assistant with the easy laugh, the subtle flirtations disguised as professionalism, the way she looked at Greg with something I hadn't seen in years. But what hurt more than imagining her was knowing that for months, she had been a secret woven into the fabric of my marriage, a silent invader that no one warned me about. I found myself caught between anger and confusion. Why didn't he tell me? Did he ever love me at all? Was everything we had just a lie? I tried to talk to my closest friends, But words felt inadequate. How do you explain the feeling of betrayal when it's wrapped in quiet half-truths and stolen moments? How do you ask for comfort when you don't even understand your own pain? I sought refuge in the small things: walks in the park, long baths, pages of journals I hadn't touched in years. Writing became my only outlet, the place where I could spill the chaos in my heart without judgment. But no matter how many times I wrote "it's going to be okay," the doubt crept back. The fear that the man I married, the one I vowed to trust and love, was gone forever. One evening, after weeks of barely speaking, Greg sat down across from me. His eyes looked tired, but there was something different this time, a flicker of honesty, maybe regret. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never meant to hurt you. I got lost. In everything. In myself. But I want to try, if you're willing." I stared at him, torn between the flickering hope and the lingering pain. Could we rebuild? Or was this the end of everything? The truth was, I didn't know yet. I was standing at a crossroads, one path leading toward forgiveness, the other toward letting go. What I did know was this: silence had shattered us. And if we wanted to survive, we had to start speaking, even if the words hurt. Part 3, The Weight of Truth. Days blurred into nights, and the silence between Greg and me stretched like a chasm I wasn't sure we could cross. The apology was just the beginning, the fragile thread I clung to as I tried to understand the man sitting across from me. He wasn't the same man I married. The confident, steady partner had been replaced by someone haunted, fragmented by his own mistakes. Yet, beneath his guilt, I sensed a desperate need for redemption, or maybe just a wish to salvage what was left. Our conversations were awkward at first, weighed down by years of unspoken frustrations and raw pain. Every word felt like stepping on broken glass, every glance charged with 1,000 unasked questions. I realized that healing wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't be easy. It would take everything we had, and maybe more. I asked Greg for the truth. Not the polished version he thought I wanted, but the ugly, painful reality. He told me about the loneliness he felt when I was busy with work, the pressure he couldn't share, the way Claire filled a void I hadn't seen growing. It wasn't an excuse, it was a confession, and it broke me to pieces. Yet, somehow, in those moments of brutal honesty, I found a sliver of clarity. The man who hurt me was also hurting. The betrayal was a symptom of wounds deeper than I had imagined. But understanding didn't mean forgiveness was automatic. My heart still ached with every memory, every stolen touch, every whispered lie. The betrayal had poisoned the well of trust, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be restored. I began therapy alone, trying to untangle my own feelings and rebuild my shattered sense of self. The sessions were exhausting and illuminating. I confronted my own fears and vulnerabilities, the insecurities I'd buried beneath years of perfect marriage illusions. Greg joined a few sessions later. The therapist's office became our battleground and sanctuary, a place where we faced the wreckage together. Sometimes we fought fiercely, our anger spilling over like a storm. Other times, tears and silence spoke louder than any words. We made small steps, a touch here, a shared laugh there, but every breakthrough came with setbacks. Trust was a fragile glass that could shatter with one careless move. At home, the tension was palpable. The house echoed with the absence of the ease we once had. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, haunted by images of betrayal. My dreams were no longer safe places but theaters of pain replayed. Friends noticed the change in me. Some offered support, others distanced themselves, unsure how to navigate the fallout. I felt isolated in my pain, trapped in a narrative I never wanted to live. And yet, amidst the darkness, there were moments of light, the smile of a child playing in the garden, the quiet comfort of a sunset shared in silence, the tentative promise of a future not yet broken. I realized that healing wouldn't mean forgetting. It wouldn't erase the wounds or pretend the betrayal never happened. It meant learning to live with the scars, to find strength in vulnerability, and to redefine what love could be, if we were brave enough to try. But the question lingered: was love enough? Could we rebuild a future from the ruins of our past, or was some damage too deep to repair? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I was no longer willing to live a lie. The truth was heavy, but it was mine now, and I would carry it, no matter where it led. Part 4, Fractured Foundations. The days that followed felt like walking on thin ice, every step uncertain, every word a test. Greg and I moved through our fractured marriage like strangers trying to learn a language neither of us fully understood anymore. The comfort of routine was gone, replaced by a cautious dance of half-truths and guarded glances. Despite the wounds, I clung to the idea that we could find our way back, that the history we shared wasn't erased by a moment of weakness. But as time stretched on, I began to see just how deep the cracks ran beneath our foundation. Craig's work became an escape. Late nights turned into long weekends away, and his phone was always just out of sight. Suspicion gnawed at me, fueled by the memories of Claire and the silence he sometimes slipped into when I asked too many questions. Every unanswered text, every hushed phone call made my heart tighten with a mix of dread and disbelief. I wanted to trust him, I truly did, but the ghosts of betrayal cast long shadows. Each small omission felt like a betrayal in itself, each secret a wedge driving us further apart. My own reflection in the mirror was a stranger. The woman staring back at me carried the weight of grief, anger, and exhaustion. I barely recognized the hopeful, vibrant person I used to be, the woman who believed in fairy tales and forever. Our friends, once a source of joy, became silent observers. Some took sides quietly, while others avoided the awkward tension that clung to us like a second skin. Invitations dried up, and I found myself retreating into a shell of self-preservation. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, Craig and I sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken pain. I asked him the question that had haunted me since the day I discovered the affair: why didn't you come to me? Why did you let it get this far? His eyes glistened with tears, the same vulnerability I hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. I was scared, he said quietly. I thought I could fix it on my own. I didn't want to hurt you, but I was so wrong. His confession broke something open inside me. It was not the closure I wanted, but it was honest, raw and painful. But honest. I realized that for all his faults, Craig was fighting his own battle with guilt and regret. We agreed to couples therapy, a new step into the unknown. It was terrifying, bearing the rawest parts of ourselves to a stranger, reliving wounds that still bled, but it was also a lifeline. The therapist helped us uncover the silent fractures in our communication, the unmet needs that had driven us apart. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a slow, arduous process of learning how to be vulnerable again, how to listen without judgment, how to forgive without forgetting. But not all wounds heal. Some scars are permanent reminders of pain endured, and just as I began to believe we might survive this, a new revelation shattered the fragile peace we'd built. I found a message on Greg's phone, a single, brief text from Claire that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a secret rendezvous, not exactly, but it was enough to remind me that the past might not be as buried as I hoped. My hands trembled as I confronted Greg. "What is this?" I demanded. He hesitated, then admitted that Claire had reached out to him recently, trying to reconnect. He said he'd kept it from me because he didn't want to stir up old wounds, but the damage was done. The fragile trust we'd begun to piece together cracked once again, and I was left wondering if some betrayals are too deep to ever truly heal. Part 5. Crossing the Rubicon. The fragile thread of trust we had been painstakingly weaving snapped, and the silence that fell between Greg and me was heavier than any argument. I could feel the walls closing in, the past clawing its way back through the cracks I thought I'd sealed forever. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to rebuild anymore, or if I even could. Days blurred into one another as I wrestled with the chaos inside me. Every morning, I woke with a desperate hope that this was just a nightmare, a cruel twist of fate that would dissolve once I opened my eyes. But reality was relentless. Craig was here, but somehow distant, a ghost trapped between guilt and denial. I began to watch him closely, looking for signs that might reassure me, or confirm my fears. The way his smile seemed forced, the flicker of guilt in his eyes when I caught him off guard, the way he avoided certain topics or disappeared for hours without explanation. All of it was a silent storm raging beneath the surface. Our home, once a sanctuary filled with laughter and warmth, felt cold and unfamiliar. The spaces we'd once shared as a couple now echoed with emptiness. Even our unborn daughter, a symbol of hope and new beginnings, couldn't bridge the gulf between us. The therapy sessions continued, but the progress felt like crawling through mud, slow, exhausting, and filled with setbacks. We fought more than we talked, the wounds so raw that even the smallest word could ignite a flare of pain. One night, after a particularly brutal argument, I stood in front of the mirror, tears streaming down my face, asking myself if I was strong enough to survive this heartbreak. Would I ever be able to trust Greg again? Or was I just clinging to a ghost of what we once had? Greg approached me quietly, his eyes full of sorrow. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything. I'm trying. I swear." But his words felt fragile against the weight of betrayal. I wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that love could conquer all. But fear gnawed at my heart, the fear that once broken, some things can never be made whole again. Then, one evening, I stumbled upon an unopened email on Greg's laptop. Curiosity and dread pulled me closer as I read a message from Claire. It wasn't an innocent note. It was a reminder of unfinished business. An invitation to rekindle a flame Greg promised was extinguished. The betrayal cut deeper than before, not just because of the message itself, but because Greg had hidden it from me. The silence, the lies, the ongoing deception, it was a poison slowly seeping into every corner of our lives. I confronted Greg again, voice trembling but resolute. "Why can't you just let it go? Why do you keep letting her back into our lives?" He looked away, defeated. "I don't know. Maybe part of me is still tied to that past, to the mistakes I made. But I want to be here, with you, with our family. I'm trying to fix what I broke." His desperation was real, but so was the damage. The line between forgiveness and self-preservation blurred. I was caught in a painful limbo, unsure whether to fight for the family I dreamed of or to let go and find myself again. That night, alone with my thoughts, I realized something profound. Sometimes love isn't enough to heal a broken heart. Sometimes, the hardest choice is the one that saves you from yourself. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to decide whether to keep walking it with Greg, or to finally cross the Rubicon and choose a new beginning, even if it meant leaving everything behind. Part 6, Breaking Point. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Greg and me thickened like a fog refusing to lift. Every conversation felt like walking on shattered glass, every silence like a wound that refused to heal. I kept hoping for a breakthrough, some sign that the man I married was still inside the shell of guilt and regret. But with each passing day, the distance between us only grew. Our daughter was born during this turmoil, a tiny, fragile life whose presence should have been a source of unbreakable joy. Instead, her cries echoed through a house filled with cold glances and half-hearted smiles. I watched Greg hold her with a tenderness that tore at my heart, proof of his capacity to love, yet overshadowed by the betrayal that loomed over us. At night, I lay awake wondering if this was the end or just a painful beginning. Could love survive the wounds of infidelity? Could trust be rebuilt brick by brick when every stone was soaked in lies? I wanted to believe so desperately, but the voice inside me whispered caution. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the nursery window, watching the world outside move on as if nothing had changed. I thought about the promises we made, the dreams we shared, and the life we planned to build. And I realized that to move forward, I had to confront the hardest truth of all, that sometimes, love isn't enough to hold two broken souls together. That evening, Greg came home later than usual. There was a weight in his step, a shadow behind his eyes. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching like a chasm between us. "I'm sorry," he said finally, voice raw. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't want to lose you or her." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man drowning in regret and confusion, but still fighting for us. But was fighting enough? "I don't know if we can fix this," I whispered. "Maybe we're trying to hold on to something that's already gone." The words hung heavy between us, a truth neither of us wanted to say but both needed to hear. In the days that followed, we tried therapy again, hoping that professional help could guide us through the wreckage. But every session uncovered more pain, more cracks in our foundation. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work, like digging through rubble, hoping to find a single stone worth saving. One night, Greg's phone buzzed with a message from Claire. The familiar knot tightened in my stomach. He didn't notice me reading it over his shoulder. The message was casual, almost friendly, but the implications were clear. The past wasn't ready to stay buried. I confronted him again. "Why does she still reach out? Why don't you stop this?" He sighed, exhaustion etched deep in his face. "I'm trying. I want to cut all ties. But it's not that simple." His words felt like a confession and an excuse all at once. The fragile thread holding us together frayed even more. I started to question everything: my judgment, my love, my future. Was I being foolish to stay? Was the man I loved still inside the man who betrayed me? Or was that man gone forever, replaced by someone I barely recognized? One night, in the silence of our bedroom, I made a choice. Not a sudden decision born of anger or pain, but a quiet, resolute understanding that I had to protect myself and my daughter, no matter what. I whispered into the darkness, I deserve more than this. I deserve to be whole again. It was the first step toward freedom and the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter. Part 7. Picking up the pieces. The days after my quiet declaration were a blur of decisions, tears, and moments of unbearable clarity. I realized that healing wouldn't come from holding on to the wreckage but from slowly building something new, for myself and my daughter. Greg tried to talk, to plead for one more chance, to promise that he would be different. I listened, feeling the weight of years together pushing me toward forgiveness, but I also felt the raw ache of betrayal whispering caution in my ear. One afternoon, I sat on the floor of our empty living room, the walls echoing memories of laughter and love now shadowed by silence. My daughter's laughter bubbled from her crib, a small light in the heavy darkness that had engulfed us. In that moment, I knew I had to be strong, not just for me, but for her. I contacted a counselor, not couples therapy, but someone who could help me navigate the chaos inside my own heart. Those sessions became a lifeline, a place where I could unravel the tangled emotions and find my voice again. I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting but about freeing yourself from the chains of pain. Meanwhile, Greg and I agreed to live separately for a while. The physical distance was painful but necessary. It gave us space to breathe, to reflect, and to understand what we truly wanted from life and from each other. The nights alone were the hardest. I wrestled with loneliness, regret, and the haunting question, could I ever trust him again? Or more terrifyingly, could I trust myself to make the right choice? Friends and family rallied around me, offering support and love, but I often felt isolated by the depth of my pain. Betrayal isn't something you easily share, it's raw and personal, a wound that feels like it belongs only to you. One evening, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I whispered promises to her, promises of love, safety, and a future free from the shadows that had haunted us. I promised her that no matter what happened between her father and me, she would never be caught in the middle of broken trust and shattered hearts. In the quiet moments, I found strength I didn't know I had. Strength to face the painful truth that sometimes love alone can't heal what's been broken. And strength to believe in a future where happiness wasn't a fragile hope but a reality I could shape with my own hands. Greg and I met again to really talk, about what came next. There were tears, apologies, and painful honesty. We both admitted that love alone wasn't enough to erase the past, but it could still be a foundation for something different, if we were willing to try. I didn't know if our marriage would survive. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible or if we would walk away forever. But I knew that whatever happened, I was no longer a victim of betrayal. I was a woman reclaiming her life, one painful, beautiful step at a time. Part 8. The New Beginning. Months had passed since that fateful discovery. The initial shock and pain that once felt like a suffocating storm had softened into a steady rain, persistent, but bearable. Life, it seemed, was giving me a chance to breathe again. Greg and I had tried counseling together, but we both understood that the version of us who once dreamed of forever was gone. The betrayal had left a permanent scar, and no matter how much we wanted to heal, some wounds don't fully close. One afternoon, after a session, Greg and I sat in the quiet of our now empty living room. The house no longer felt like a prison of secrets, but rather a space waiting to be refilled with new memories, perhaps separate ones. We spoke gently, honestly, without blame. We accepted that love doesn't always conquer all, and sometimes the bravest act is to let go. I thought back to the moment I gave birth, so full of hope, so trusting, so unaware. That tiny life, my daughter, was the only thing that made sense to me now. She was my anchor, my reason to fight for happiness beyond the ruins of my marriage. The hardest part wasn't ending the relationship. It was learning to forgive myself for trusting too easily, for not seeing the signs, for thinking love was enough. But with time, I realized that my strength lay not in perfection but in survival. I was no longer just a woman betrayed. I was a mother, a fighter, a person rebuilding her world. I moved out of the house we shared and found a small apartment filled with sunlight and hope. My daughter's laughter echoed through the rooms, filling the space with life. I decorated it not as a symbol of loss but as a sanctuary of new beginnings. Friends became my family. Their support was a balm for my soul. Together, we laughed, cried, and celebrated every small victory, from a good day without tears to the first night my daughter slept soundly in her own room. I didn't know what the future held, whether Greg and I would ever be friends or just two strangers who shared a past. But I did know this: I was reclaiming my story, writing new chapters filled with honesty, love for myself, and hope for what was yet to come. Every day was still a choice to heal, to grow, to believe in happiness beyond heartbreak. And as I watched my daughter take her first steps into the world, I knew I was ready to do the same. This wasn't just an end, it was a beginning, one forged in pain but tempered by resilience, and filled with the quiet power of a woman who refused to be broken.